Welcome back, Criminophiles, to another episode of Homicide Cases. I'm your host, Misfit. Join me as I explore the criminal mind and the American justice system.
I'm Anthony Balaam, an American serial killer with 4 known victims.
In-depth criminological analysis of Anthony Balaam, better known as the Trenton Strangler, and the intersection of urban decay, forensic advancement, and predatory behavioral patterns in late 20th century New Jersey.
The emergence of Anthony Balaam as a serial predator in the mid-1990s represents a critical juncture in the history of urban crimes in New Jersey. Known to the public and law enforcement as the Trenton Strangler, Balaam's activities between 1994 and 1996 underscore a complex interplay between socioeconomic marginalization, the crack cocaine epidemic, and the evolving capabilities of forensic science. This video provides an exhaustive examination of Balaam's life, his predatory methodology, the victimology associated with his crimes, and the protracted legal battles that followed his apprehension. By situating Balaam within the broader context of American serial homicide, the analysis illuminates the systemic vulnerabilities that allowed him to operate undetected for nearly 2 years within a highly localized geographic radius.
The socio-geographic context of 1990s Trenton.
To understand the predatory success of Anthony Balaam, one must analyze the physical and social environment of Trenton during the late 20th century. The capital city of New Jersey, like many industrial centers in the Northeast, was grappling with the lingering effects of deindustrialization, which had created vast tracts of abandoned property and vacant lots. These urban voids provided the essential infrastructure of Balaam's crimes, offering secluded locations where violence could be enacted without immediate detection. Balaam's operational area was remarkably constrained, centered around his residence at 421 Stuyvesant Avenue. Criminological research into his patterns reveals a marauder profile, where the offender hunts close to home, utilizing familiarity with the local terrain to facilitate both the capture of victims and the disposal of remains. The prevalence of vacant lots in this 2-mile radius served as a primary disposal site for 3 of his 4 known victims.
The role of the crack epidemic.
The 1990s were characterized by the height of the crack crisis, which profoundly influenced the dynamics of street-level carnal work. Anthony Balaam was not only a consumer of the drug, but also utilized it as a tactical tool. His modus operandi involved approaching women in the early morning hours, a time when the desperation of withdrawal or the need for the next hit often overrides self-preservation instincts. By offering the drug in exchange for carnal favors, Balaam successfully lowered the defensive barriers of his victims, luring them into isolated environments where he could transition from a potential client to a violent aggressor.
Biographical profile of Anthony Balaam.
Anthony Balaam was born on July 9, 1965 in Trenton, New Jersey. Throughout his developmental years and early adulthood, he managed to maintain what forensic psychologists term the mask of sanity, an outward appearance of normalcy that conceals a violent internal life. Neighbors and associates frequently described him as unassuming, soft-spoken, and polite. This dichotomy is a common trait among organized and mixed-method serial predators, who often integrate into their communities to avoid suspicion.
Domestic life versus criminal reality.
Balaam's domestic situation further complicated the perception of him as a violent threat. He maintained a 10-year relationship with a woman with whom he fathered 2 children. While he lived at 421 Stuyvesant Avenue with a roommate during the peak of his homicide spree, he remained tethered to his family unit. This stability provided a psychological home base that likely contributed to his ability to remain calm and collected during his eventual police interrogation. Despite this facade of stability, Balaam's history was not devoid of red flags. He had a criminal record involving drug offenses and burglary, indicating a long-standing involvement in the underground economy of Trenton. His personal struggle with coke addiction likely fueled his need for both financial resources, leading to burglary, and the proximity to the marginalized populations he eventually targeted.
The Detroit Interlude.
A significant and often overlooked period in Balaam's timeline occurred between July 1995 and January 1996, when he temporarily relocated to Detroit, Michigan. This period represents a cooling off or displacement phase in his criminal career. Following his arrest in Trenton, investigators contacted Detroit homicide detectives to determine if Balaam could be linked to unsolved homicides in that region. Although Detroit officials eventually denied that he was a suspect in any local unsolved cases, the investigation highlights the necessity of tracking the movements of transient offenders who may change jurisdictions to evade detection or seek new hunting grounds.
Victimology and the chronology of the Strangler spree.
The victims of Anthony Balaam were uniformly selected based on their accessibility and perceived vulnerability within the social hierarchy of Trenton. All 4 identified victims were women engaged in street-level carnal work, a demographic frequently overlooked by the broader public and sometimes by the initial layers of law enforcement.
The confirmed victims.
Balaam's victims were typically women in their late 20s to early 40s, all of who were lured under the pretense of a narcotics transaction. Balaam's first victim was Karen Denise Patterson, 41. He took her life on October 24, 1994. 5 months later, on March 19, 1995, Balaam took the life of his second victim, Valentina Kyler, 29. On April 10, 1995, Balaam took the life of his third victim, Connie Hayward, 27. Balaam's final known victim was Deborah Ann Walker, 37. The discovery of Deborah Ann Walker's body was particularly impactful. Catherine Emerson, a neighbor of Balaam, was directed by another resident to look into a nearby lot, where she found the body of the small-framed woman lying on the grass. The proximity of Walker's body to Balaam's residence, combined with the subsequent discovery of another body in the same vicinity, suggested a localized dumping ground that pointed directly to a resident of the immediate neighborhood.
Survivors and the breakdown of the pattern.
While Balaam was successful in 4 instances, at least 2 women managed to escape his grasp, providing the essential intelligence needed to secure his capture. On February 16, 1996, a woman managed to flee after being carnally assaulted by Balaam. Another woman had previously managed to escape unharmed after he produced a knife. The identification of Balaam by the February 16th survivor was a pivotal moment in the case, as her testimony provided a living link to the offender that went beyond forensic samples.
Modus operandi and psychological drivers.
The behavioral profile of Anthony Balaam suggests an offender driven by a primal need for power and dominance. While the initial encounters were framed as carnal commerce, Balaam's internal motivation was rooted in the control he exerted during the act of homicide.
The mechanism of homicide, strangulation.
Balaam chose strangulation as his primary method of taking lives, a choice that is highly significant in forensic behavioral analysis. Unlike the distance afforded by a firearm, strangulation requires intense physical proximity and a sustained effort to overcome the victim's struggle. In his confessions, Balaam described the rage and power he experienced while slowly ending the lives of his victims. This feeling of total dominion over another human being's existence is the hallmark of a power control serial predator. The rage he described suggests that the homicides were an outlet for internal frustrations, perhaps exacerbated by his own substance abuse and socioeconomic status.
Tactical evolution and knife use.
Although strangulation was the terminal act, Balaam utilized a knife during the initial phases of his attacks to threaten and incapacitate his victims. This tactical use of a weapon served to transition the encounter from a consensual narcotic for carnal pleasure deal into a situation of absolute terror and compliance. The use of a knife suggests an organized approach to the capture phase of the crime, ensuring the victim remained isolated and defenseless.
The investigation and forensic breakthroughs.
The capture of Anthony Balaam was a triumph of 1990s forensic techniques combined with traditional eyewitness work. Following the discovery of Deborah Ann Walker in July 1996, the Trenton Police Department accelerated their efforts to link recent homicides to a single perpetrator.
The role of DNA evidence.
The mid-1990s were a transformative era for the use of DNA in criminal investigations. In the Balaam case, biological samples recovered from the bodies of at least 2 victims provided a genetic profile that was eventually matched to Balaam. This biological evidence was crucial in overcoming the potential defense that the encounters were merely consensual carnal acts that went wrong. The DNA definitively placed Balaam at the scene of multiple crimes, establishing the serial nature of his violence.
The confession and interrogation.
When arrested on August 8, 1996, Balaam maintained his unassuming persona. He spoke politely to detectives, showing no outward signs of the rage he would later describe as his primary motivation. This ability to switch between extreme violence and polite cooperation allowed him to detail his crimes with a level of clarity that was both helpful to the prosecution and chilling to the investigators. He admitted responsibility for the 4 homicides and the carnal assault of the surviving victim, providing a comprehensive account of his actions.
Legal challenges and post-conviction relief.
The legal journey of Anthony Balaam was marked by a 4-week trial that concluded with a conviction on 4 counts of homicide and 4 counts of aggravated carnal assault. Although he was eligible for the death penalty, the jury ultimately chose to sentence him to 4 consecutive life terms on January 26, 2001. Each term carried a 30-year period of parole ineligibility, creating a total minimum of 120 years before he could be considered for release.
The Miranda and ineffective assistance claims.
In the years following his conviction, Balaam pursued various avenues for relief, primarily focusing on the conduct of his defense counsel and the voluntariness of his confession. One of his core arguments was that his confession violated the 14th Amendment because it was the result of extensive questioning. He further claimed that his lawyer failed to provide a closing argument at his Miranda hearing, thereby depriving him of effective representation.
The excusable neglect ruling.
A significant legal development occurred during Balaam's post-conviction relief (PCR) proceedings. His petition was filed 10 months after the 5-year deadline mandated by Rule 322-12A. However, the appellate court determined that Balaam had demonstrated excusable neglect. He had not been personally notified of the 5-year limitation, and he had documented multiple timely requests to the Office of the Public Defender to file the petition on his behalf. While this allowed his substantive claims to be heard, the court ultimately found them insufficient to warrant a reversal of his convictions.
The role of the confidential informant.
Balaam's appeal also highlighted the role of the confidential informant who had provided police with information regarding what Balaam was wearing on the night of one of the homicides. Balaam argued that the state's failure to disclose this informant's identity was a fatal error, as the informant's information was used to introduce his confession. The court rejected this, noting that the informant was not a witness to the crimes, and that their role was limited to the preliminary identification of clothing, which did not reach the threshold for mandatory disclosure.
Incarceration and current status.
Anthony Balaam is currently incarcerated at the New Jersey State Prison, a maximum security facility in Trenton. He is part of a notable population of inmates that includes some of the most prolific serial predators in the state's history, such as Richard Cottingham and Charles Cullen. Given his 120-year minimum sentence, he will not be eligible for parole until August 4, 2116, a date that ensures he will remain in prison for the duration of his life. His presence in the Trenton facility is a physical reminder of the impact his crimes had on the local community. The New Jersey State Prison, which has housed everything from internet criminals like Kai the Hitchhiker to mafia hitmen like Richard Kuklinski, provides a stark ending to the narrative of a man who once walked the same streets as an unassuming neighbor.
Criminological synthesis and behavioral insights.
The case of Anthony Balaam offers profound insights into the psychology of predatory localized violence. The following synthesis examines the underlying trends and casual relationships that define the Trenton Strangler era.
The geography of convenience.
Balaam's 2-mile hunting ground suggests a high level of geographic stability. This is characteristic of many serial predators who lack a personal vehicle or who feel a psychological need to operate within a comfort zone. In Balaam's case, the high density of potential victims and abandoned structures within the Stuyvesant Avenue corridor eliminated the need for travel, thereby reducing the risk of a random traffic stop or other police interaction. His move to Detroit and subsequent return further indicates that while he could physically leave his zone, his predatory habits were deeply rooted in the specific urban landscape of Trenton.
The psychological gratification of asphyxiation.
The use of strangulation as an instrument of power and rage points to a specific subtype of hedonistic predatory behavior. For Balaam, the act of taking a life was not an unfortunate necessity to cover his tracks, but the very goal of the encounter. The prolonged nature of strangulation provided him with the power he explicitly sought, allowing him to witness the gradual loss of life in a way that other methods do not permit. This need for control may have been a compensatory mechanism for a life that, in other respects like narcotic addiction and burglary, was spinning out of his control.
The systemic failure of victim protection.
The fact that 4 women lost their lives and multiple others were assaulted before Balaam was apprehended speaks to a broader implication regarding the protection of marginalized citizens. Ladies of the night and narcotic users in the 1990s often existed in a legal gray zone where their disappearances were not always prioritized as potential serial homicides. It was only through the convergence of physical evidence, like DNA, the bravery of survivors who came forward despite their own legal vulnerabilities, and the localized discovery of multiple bodies that the pattern became undeniable.
Detailed conclusion. The legacy of the Trenton Strangler.
Anthony Balaam's transition from a quiet neighbor to a convicted serial predator serves as a dark chapter in Trenton's criminal history. His case emphasizes the necessity of integrating forensic science with social awareness. While DNA evidence eventually secured his conviction, it was the social environment of 1990s, Trenton marked by addiction, urban decay, and the marginalization of ladies of the night, that provided him with the opportunity to take their lives. The legal proceedings against Balaam, particularly the excusable neglect ruling, highlight the complexities of the New Jersey judicial system and its commitment to ensuring that even the most reviled offenders receive a thorough review of their claims. However, the overwhelming evidence against him, bolstered by his own admissions of a desire for power and control, ensured that justice was served in the form of multiple life sentences. As he serves his sentence alongside other notorious figures in the New Jersey State Prison, the story of Anthony Balaam remains a critical study for criminologists. It serves as a reminder that the most dangerous predators are often those who blend in perfectly with their surroundings, using a polite and soft-spoken mask to hide a volatile and lethal internal rage. The ultimate legacy of the Trenton Strangler is the increased awareness of the vulnerabilities of marginalized populations and the continued evolution of the forensic and investigative techniques used to protect them.
Extended analysis. The biological and psychological interplay.
To further explore the rage described by Balaam, one must consider the neurochemical landscape of a narcotics user in the 1990s. The pharmacology of the narcotics involves the inhibition of dopamine reuptake, leading to intense euphoria followed by a profound crash characterized by irritability, anxiety, and in some cases extreme aggression. The molecular structure of the substance, represented as C17H21NO, drives a cycle of addiction that often results in the erosion of impulse control. Balaam's case, the rage he felt during strangulation may have been a manifestation of these chemical fluctuations, directed toward women he viewed as instrumental to his supply of either carnal pleasure or narcotics. Furthermore, the power/control motivations cited in behavioral charts for Balaam suggests a psychological profile that transcends simple addiction. This type of offender derives gratification from the victim's reaction to the imminent loss of their lives. The use of a knife to threaten, then the transition to hands-on strangulation indicates a ritualistic element to the violence, where the offender prolongs the victim's terror to maximize his own sense of dominance. The localized nature of these crimes also suggests a proximity of convenience. For an offender like Balaam, the risk of being caught was mitigated by his deep integration into the neighborhood. He was not an outsider coming in, he was a fixture in the community. This allowed him to observe police activity, note the movements of his potential victims, and select the most opportune moments for his attacks. The neighbor Catherine Emerson's discovery of Deborah Ann Walker was not just a random event, but the inevitable intersection of Balaam's public and private worlds.
Institutional and social outlook.
In the decades since Balaam's conviction, the city of Trenton has undergone various urban renewal projects aimed at eliminating the urban voids he exploited. However, the systemic issues of substance abuse and the marginalization of street-level workers persist in many American cities. The Balaam case remains a primary example used in law enforcement training to illustrate the importance of linking disparate cases early through forensic databases like CODIS, which was in its infancy during his spree. The refusal of the jury to grant capital punishment to Balaam, opting instead for 120 years of parole ineligibility, also reflects a shifting perspective in New Jersey's legal history. It prioritized a living death through permanent incarceration over the finality of execution, ensuring that the offender would spend decades reflecting on the power he once thought he possessed, now stripped away by the very system he sought to evade.
Summary of legal precedents in State versus Balaam.
The appellate decisions in Balaam's case have reinforced several key principles in New Jersey law. 1. Excusable neglect clarified the standards for relaxing the 5-year time bar for post-conviction relief when an inmate is not properly notified of their rights or when counsel fails to act on documented requests. 2. Miranda voluntariness affirmed that long periods of questioning do not inherently invalidate a confession if the suspect remains calm, is properly informed of their rights, and participates in the dialogue. 3. Confidential informant privilege protected the state's right to keep informants confidential when their information is secondary and not central to the defense's ability to prove a prima facie case of innocence. These precedents continue to guide the handling of complex serial crime cases, ensuring a balance between the rights of the accused and the community's need for the permanent removal of dangerous predators from society. Anthony Balaam's life, crimes, and eventual legal defeat remain a testament to the endurance of justice in the face of the most calculated urban violence. That concludes another episode of Homicide Cases as I close the file on Anthony Balaam. Join me next time as I open the file on Joseph Baldy.
That's my story, as I blend in with the rest of the incarcerated.
Thank you for watching. If this is your kind of content, then please give me a like and follow. It'll help keep this series going. This is Misfit signing off, and as always, stay safe.